So, all right, welcome everyone to our April meeting in Zoom. This is a monthly meetup. Anyone who teaches the ukulele or teaches music through the ukulele or wants to teach, this is very open for everyone who's interested. We've been running this since August 2020. And today we have a special guest, invited guest, who's going to show us how he teaches improvisation. This is a topic very much in vogue right now. And feel free to put any comments or questions in the chat. Unfortunately, today, Marlise, who is normally co-hosting with me, very last minute, she's not able to make it. My name is Ann Koo, and I'm going to ask you to have your ukuleles nearby because this is a workshop. And please mute yourself so we have the highest quality sound. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Lindsay Higgs, based out of England. I met him a couple years ago in person and had the pleasure of getting to know him and his music. He's a composer, a teacher, and also wrote the syllabus for all the grades in the MTB. So I'm going to ask you to say more about that, Lindsay.
Well, I thought I'd just launch straight into the improvisation. I know we're all teachers here, so this is just kind of very much my sort of views on it. And I already looked in the chat earlier on, and people are coming on with different ideas. So I just wanted to really say what I see as being improvisation and what it's about, and just give a couple of little ideas of how I teach it, really. So I suppose improvisation is aiming to create a composition in the moment, really, and it is similar to composition in the sense of, I think they're both a craft. There are certainly people that are very, very gifted and can excel at a much higher level. So I think there's room for that. I think an awful lot of the basics of composition and an awful lot of the basics of improvisation are kind of learnable skills, really. And a few ideas I've had about it. Probably the first thing is just knowing the language, really. I've done a bit of jazz, I've done a lot of blues, I've done that. Improvisation can obviously cross different genres, cross different musical cultures. And an example I put in my handout was one of my students, actually. He was ex-RAF, and the RAF did a scheme where they would allow people to have a small bursary to explore something which they might want to explore leaving the RAF. He came to me wanting rock guitar lessons, and he'd spent years and years listening to bands like ATVT, so he knew the language. His challenge was actually developing the technique to express that language, and it's about whereas younger students be able to pick up the technique quite quickly, they don't necessarily know the language. So I put that as my important thing. I think developing an ear is part of that as well. There's lots of exercises we can do that. You can play a chord progression, have a go at singing a tune along with the chord progression, and then if you find something you like, stop and try and work out what you're actually playing on the instrument. So it's the facility we're all aiming for. I must confess I don't always reach that, is to be able to think any musical phrase you want and translate it to your instrument. So it's about developing that oral imagination and then developing it as a technique. And then really technique is the key. It's knowing your chords, knowing the scales, knowing the fingerboard. I actually use one of the exercises I'm going to look at. I actually use that partly for teaching as well. But I always tell my students when they feel there's a lot to learn, there's only 4 strings on the ukulele, and most people only play up to about the 12th. I was surprised. So that's 48 notes. And I'm really quite interested in ancient Egypt. And ancient Egyptian scribes had to learn somewhere in the region of 7,000 hieroglyphs to write fluently. So as ukulele players, we actually got it quite easy, really. But the two exercises I want to the other thing I must say in the introduction is obviously it's about practice. it's a skill which we can develop. So I've got a couple of little musical ideas that I use for my students. I'm more happy to things, and I welcome criticisms or comments or anything really. But the first one is using a blues scale. So there's two ways you could do this. You can actually use the exercise to teach the blues scale, or you can actually just teach the student the scale. So go away and work on this for a week and then come back. And then I've done a little recording. I've actually made some backing tracks, but I'm just going to use my loop pedal this evening. So it's just a C blues scale. So I'm just, most people know, we can run through it really quickly. So the notes are going to be your open C string, third fret to give you an E flat. Then you've got F, F sharp and G, B flat and C. And then back down again. So C, B flat, G, F sharp, F, E flat, C. I once had a conversation with someone who's the head of jazz at London College of Music, and I said, "Are we correct calling that an F sharp, or should it be a G flat?" And he said, and he actually said to me, "In jazz, it doesn't matter. You can call it what you like." So I'm calling it an F sharp. But what I do is I'll just check. So I've got this little backing track. It should be working. Can everyone hear that all right? Okay, so what I would do is once I want to introduce this scale, often I'll start, if they know the chords first of all, I'll just get them to do 12-bar chord progression. So there's one in the handout. I'm sure we all know what it is, but we can have a little run through. It's just well, the way I've done it is three bars of C, then 1 bar of C7, then 2 bars of F, 2 bars of C, then a bar of G, F, C. So once you've got that, I'll get the students to do the progression a few times. And then I like to make, I once had a student got really distressed when I talked about just making up a solo. So a lot of, well, not some people just take it like a duck to water, but some people do find it really stressful. So I've tried to think of a sort of fun way of doing it. So I usually ask them what their favourite pudding is. So in America, it might be a dessert. So I found something like sticky toffee pudding, which is one of my favourite puddings. It's a really good rhythm. And then what I might say is just 2 notes, E and E flat. So you have something like that. Then my internet connection is unstable. I'll keep going if I get cut off, but I'll just so I'll just start from the back again. And then I'll just make up a rhythm using just those 2 notes and that rhythm. That kind of thing. Once they're happy with that, I might then introduce the next 3 notes of the scale. And get them to swap between the 2. And they can experiment as much as possible. I would just tell a little bit of the history of the blues and talk about how, because it develops from the field songs of the slaves, and you've got a call and response, it's okay to leave lots of spaces. So you can do sort of if they find that a bit daunting at first, I might also just get them to use the 3 notes in the scale. It's the open C, note F, and then the G, and get them to fit them in with where the chords are in the chord progression, which leads into the next exercise I'm going to look at in a moment, where you're creating a sort of skeleton outline of a solo to work with. But I find that those kind of rhythms seem to work quite well. So that's how I tend to teach it, really. And then after you've introduced those three notes, you can then add the top two notes as well. The other thing I read quite a while ago was someone compared improvising to skateboarding. And a professional skateboarder will have a routine built up of lots of little tricks. And what you can do is you can say, okay, find stuff in the process of experimenting. You might find that there's a little lick you particularly like that you use, and you can come back to it. So you can also use that as a way of approaching a solo. So you're like building up a repertoire of tricks as well. And I read a book of Steve Vai transcriptions, and the transcriber was pointing out that Steve Vai, there's little fingerprints are common to his style. So it's obviously a very widespread technique, and lots of people use it. So I tell students that a way of approaching as well. So I suppose those are probably the three ways I get people into doing the blues. And then things like the three notes, you can do those as hammer-ons, like, and then stuff like the top notes, you can do a hammer on the pull-off. So they can start putting in things that aren't too tricky, but sound quite flashy. So they're little things they can start building up. And that's really how I kind of teach the blues, really. I'll go through the second one. This is going quicker than I thought. The second chord progression, I'll have to record it, but I use this is just based around the C major scale. With these two scales, they're using open strings, they're not movable shapes, but I think the second one is I'm just going to use a really standard chord progression. I'll record it in a minute, but it's just one that I'm sure everybody knows, which is this. So I'll quickly record that. I'll just get rid of it, and I'll show you the sort of thing I can do. I'll do with that. So I'll do a bit slower. I was a bit ambitious. And then what I do is I just get students to start off just using the root notes of the chords. So it could be the C there, the open A string, the F there, then the G. Once they're happy with that, you can fit in the C string as well. And then you've actually not got much more to do to fill in the whole C major scale. So you can just build up a bit of knowledge of the scale as you go along, and then they can use the E to go to the C chord. You could also use it there as well. And once you've done that, you've more or less covered the whole of the C major scale, and you've got a little framework. So you could do something like this. And then you can just elaborate it by going up a step or linking notes together. So you could have your C, and I've found that's quite a good technique to they then have a framework they can start using, and you can just add other notes and add other fills in. You can ornament it. Once you're happy with that, I won't go too much into it, but you can also, I put a few other suggestions. You can use chord shapes as well. So you could do just a bit of a C chord played there using that shape, and that can work really well. people like Django Reinhardt use that a lot because he was influenced by saxophone players who, rather than using scales, use chord tones, and sliding up a note into the chord shape can sound really effective. That kind of thing. And the other thing as well is a little thing I find quite useful as a hint is if a note doesn't quite work with the chord, usually either going up one step the scale or one step down. With these kind of exercises, you're going to find a note that that will fit in with the chord, and then that's going to get you out of trouble. I've done a little kind of thing here about what to do if it goes wrong as well. And then there's the Richie Blackmore semi-jokingly once said that if you play a note wrong, just keep playing it because it'll sound like you're being really clever harmonically, and eventually you'll hit a note where the hit a chord notes work with. And I've also said really to enjoy it. Really. So that's generally how I teach improvisation. Right? For the further reading, there's a book called The Jazz Theory Workbook by Jerry Coker, and that's got a really good section on how to prepare a tune for performance, which I found really useful as well. So, that's my introduction to improvisation.
Thank you, Lindsay. So, do you want me to put in chat the 5-page PDF that you prepared so they
Yes,
can?
please, yeah.
All right. So here we go. There it is.
And the backing track. So Colin made a really useful comment. He said that he uses band in the box. So that would be a great resource for practicing soloing as well.
Okay, so I'm gonna put in 2 more links. One is the Blues and C backing track MP3. So once again, it's going to be in the chat as a Google Drive link. So that's the first one. And then the second one is the pop backing track, which is your 4-chord. Yeah, let me just make sure. Copy.
I keep meaning to challenge my students with that one, because there must be hundreds of songs that use that chord progression, and see which student can come up with the longest list of them. But I haven't done that yet. I just saw a question that Chow was using a looper pedal.
Right. Yeah, Jenny. Hi, Jenny. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Colin, for introducing Jenny to the group. So Jenny's question to Lindsay is, were you using a looper pedal just then?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll show you my setup. It's I don't know if you can see that. I got so sick of taking lots of pedals all over the place and assembling it all. I just did a do-it-yourself pedal board and stuck them on a piece of PDF or PDF. Anyway, cardboard. But
so Lindsay, do you mind if I interview you right now? Yeah. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to spotlight you, and then spotlight myself. I'm in front of a Yamaha Clavinova right behind the pipe organ here in a church in near Boston. So I don't have my ukulele. But one of the things I want to say is doing improvisation. I mean, what are the key elements that you need before you could even begin to improvise? I'm saying this because I'm a pianist, and I find it much easier to improvise on the piano because my fingers just know what to do than on the ukulele or the guitar.
Well, I think scales are absolutely essential, because that's the root of everything. Because the notes of a chord are just notes derived from the scale. So I'd say that is really, the more scales the more choices you have in them. So I think what I found with the ukulele is really useful as well, which is why I mentioned it then. Before, I used to really think purely in terms of scales, but I think there's a starting point, knowing your scales really. and knowing your basic chords really.
So scales, you mean major scales?
Major and minor scales, and for the pentatonic minor scale and the blues scale. So possibly the pentatonic is the best one to start with, actually, because you've only got 5 notes, so the best chance, it's not going to work quite well with the chords. So it's when you're experimenting, it's helpful.
And my second question is, so when you talk about chords, you're talking about the diatonic chords within that particular scale that we should know.
Well, I think if you, especially just what you, I'd probably say, actually, thinking about it, knowing the songs you want to work on, really good starting point. So knowing the chords for those songs, but there's a few things like the blues, that chord progression, the sort of the doo-wop kind of progression. There's 2 or 3 really standard chord progressions. So I suggest those would be the really good starting point. One to start with, so knowing those chords. So rather than, I have students that say to me, "Oh, I need to learn lots of chords," but I tell them a story of that particular chord progression. There was a song I needed to learn, and I was talking to a fellow guitarist over a cup of coffee, and he just, I'm rehearsing the song tonight. He's just, so it's that standard chord, and it's in C. So okay, so I actually always tell my students to learn chord progressions rather than individual chords, and listen and learn how they all link together. So I'd say learn 2 or 3 really standard chord progressions, and then maybe the major scales, pentatonic scales, and even just in C, we've really got with the blues scale and the major scale, the handout. That's already a good start to experiment with. And after that, you could look at possibly something like a D minor scale, something like that. That's you can start fairly. You can actually start with the root note. So rather than starting on a bit of a scale, I think it's good to have a few scales for your learning, starting going up from the root note. So like that, D minor, starting with.
What about rhythm? Because I'm just thinking, growing up playing duet, it's almost like as long as I could keep in time, stay with the rhythm with somebody else, I could play wrong notes, whatever, but people think that I'm doing the right thing,
I did a double bass. I did a double bass gig once, and I was trying to sight read something, and I realized that's when I realized that exactly that. If you play it in time, it sounds convincing. If you're playing wrong notes but you're not in time, so I think loads of practicing chord progressions for metronomes, internalizing. Another little story, I played bass in the band, and to be quite honest, I was pretty awful when I first started. And a friend of mine said, go away and practice with a metronome. And it only took me a week, actually. I was surprised how quickly you can do it. But I just solidly practiced for a week. And then the next rehearsal, I just realized how bad our drummer was. Because I realized it, and it's about listening, isn't it? And improvisation and playing in time, in the end, it all just boils down to listening. Really.
Well, here's another thing, which is why learn improvisation? How do you convince your students it's important?
I think I'm sort of fortunate in the sense that because I teach a lot of rock and pop music, improvisation is much more accepted part of that sort of approach to playing. Though even that has surprised me as a teacher, where some students want to learn a solo absolutely note perfectly from a recording. And I think that in itself is a good discipline. But I always tell them that it's all about, there's a great quote I keep coming back to, that's by bass player Jeff Berlin, and he said, the more choices, the more you know, the more choices you'll have in any musical situation that comes along. And that's what I would tell my students is improvising. If you can improvise as well as read, it's just making you versatile. And it's even if you can't read or improvise perfectly, you've actually got a foothold in exploring that. So I think it's about that really. It's just about saying the more you know, the more choices you have.
Well, yeah, so I just want to say I didn't realize how important being able to improvise was until I play the masses at church every weekend since last October, and there's so much music that it's almost like there's no point preparing preludes, postludes. So what I actually do is just improvise preludes, postludes. You're right. You're absolutely right. What was it called? Necessity is the mother of, or invention, or is that right?
Yes, necessity is the mother of invention. Yeah.
Right. There has to be fillers, and people are not gone yet, so you have to keep playing something, or the priest is not done with the communion. Right.
Yeah.
So you've got the hymn in front of you, but people have finished singing the hymn. So what do? Well, you look at the chords and you literally play your scales. You just improvise, you do all kinds of things until it's almost done, and then boom, you're over. Right. What other occasion do you see the need for improvisation? Because you're on the spot, right?
Well, I had it was only a very small audience. I was teaching to students, and I brought them this song they wanted to learn, and I listened to it a few times, and they said, "Can you teach us how to play this solo?" And the first bit of the solo was really straightforward. I could work it out by ear. The second, the third bit was likewise quite straightforward, but the middle bit was a lot trickier. And I thought, well, it's going to be something like this. And I said, "What, you mean this?" So I played the beginning. I just improvised until I got to the third bit, and they just looked at me and said, "Well, you've just heard it once and you've just played it." So all I'd done is I honed in on the bits I could definitely play, and I'd used improvisation to kind of fill the gaps. So I think it's, you never know. I was doing a gig once, and on the ukulele, and the singer of our band noticed that I just snapped a string, and he decided that the song we were doing, which didn't have a solo, would have a solo in it. As soon as he saw that, as soon as he saw I snap the string, he just said solo. So it's the more you can do it, it does get you out of can get you out of some tight corners.
Well, I think also maybe you could help us on some of the techniques. For example, things like repetition, right? If you could keep repeating, a particular riff, and then maybe some kind of variation on the same thing. Because people think improvisation is this big umbrella of all these techniques, but maybe they're just something basic, or maybe an ostinato that you just carry on throughout the whole piece to unite the piece. Is there something like for a beginner, how, like as teachers, how do we teach somebody who just stepping into improvisation, holding their hand to say, this is what you could do, just repeat that note, on this rhythm or something?
Well, it was a bit difficult to show exactly just by myself, but when I teach like the blues exercise, for example, I'll just get a backing going, and I'll just play something really simple in time with the music. And then I'll say to my student, okay, just play that back to me in time with the music. And it could be something as simple as just 2 notes. There's a guitarist called John Wheatcroft who said you could think about it as like playing the bongos. You only need 2 drums to make up a tune. So you can just swap between 2 notes. And then we'll do that. And then I'll build it up slowly. So I might get them to play a phrase, and then I'll say, okay, I'm going to play a phrase. Now you're going to play it back to me. And then after they get confident with that, I'm now going to play a phrase. You're going to use some different notes and make up your own phrase. And then we'll do that. And then the third time round, I say, right, we'll swap round. You play a phrase and I'll answer. And then the fourth time, I say, okay, you're going to play the phrase and you're going to play the answer. And then they're doing a whole. So rather than ostinatos and things like that, I think it's about having little ideas that you can just develop, and that's why I think the what's your favorite pudding is quite good, because it's a rhythm and it's a bit funny, and it like I like New York cheesecake. It's great rhythm. So I get them to play that, and then I say, okay, and because the blues scale is so forgiving, you can actually get away with an awful lot, and it'll still sound quite good. And then so it's more a case of that really. And then once they get used to the scale, that's when I think the second thing, the idea of building a skeleton, and you can still incorporate those ideas. So, okay, we're going to play the root notes of the chords, and then we're going to use the rhythm of, putting something to play the root notes of the chords, and then we're going to look at how we can link them together. And after a while, students will find that there's approaches that work for them and approaches that don't work. And in the end, it's about the process of finding your own kind of language, really.
So you're saying basically imitation, just copy.
As I say, I was quite surprised the number of students who want to learn solos note for note. When I started learning guitar, I like people like Robert Fripp, and he just locked himself in a room and learned all the scales, and he was a really innovative player. And I was assumed that as an electric guitarist, and I think the ukulele is true as well, it's about finding your own voice in the instrument and working what works for you. So whereas some people just want to learn a standard, they want to learn the solo as a piece of music from a recording, and I think that's valid. But I like the idea of trying to find my own voice with it.
Well, I think if I could be so bold to say, beginners or people who haven't improvised, one of the scariest things is to play a wrong note. Right.
Yeah.
And you're basically saying, I'm going to demonstrate. You could play all these different notes. They're not wrong.
Yes.
It's okay. Give them
And the handout, I said it's a bit like, in Toy Story, where Buzz Lightyear claims he can fly, and he just falls with style. I think soloing can be a bit like that at times, just falling with style. But it doesn't. It's someone told me once that there's three types of jazz soloists. There's the one who just will play the same thing that they know works. There'll be the one that just uses the same solo and adapts it. And then the third type is the one who doesn't know what they're going to play until they start playing it. And I think I'm like that, really, which is quite scary, but it's also quite exciting. And sometimes you get yourself in the situation that, how am I going to get out of this? And it's having the limitation. It forces you to be creative. Okay, well, I'm here now. There's a room full of people listening. What am I going to do to get out of this predicament? And it forces you, and that's stressful, but it's exciting at the same time. Sometimes the limitations are really good. I think I've put that in the hand as well. Just using one note, it's like, can you express yourself with one note, two notes, and really look at how. I did a composition course, and the tutor said our homework for that week was he made up a mode of 5 notes, and it said, right, you're all going to go away and write a piece of music you're only allowed to use those 5 notes to generate all of the musical material from. And what was interesting, in the class of about 10 people, everybody came back with a completely different piece of music. So I think limitations actually really force you to be imaginative.
Can we also talk about, when, some of us give private lessons. So when you're showing one person how to solo, right, it's very different from, let's jam together, in a group. Yeah. So, or if you're dueling with somebody else, one point is, for example, make sure you do different things. Somebody's strumming, somebody else is doing picking, maybe somebody's at a different register. How could you comment on that? The difference between soloing, teaching one person what to do to improvise versus, say, 2 or more people.
Well, I've actually found that where it's been really useful, I've done like a few guitar ensemble arrangements, like little jazz tunes things, And I do like a version of Dark Eyes, where there's a really easy bass part, there's a chord part, and then there's the melody. And what I found was I planned a couple of sessions with this one tune, and some of the students got it really quickly. Some were still struggling doing the bass part, and that's when improvisation really came into its own. Okay, we'll keep the backing going. Let's see how you can develop a solo over that. So I think it can be rather. I sort of probably not quite answering your question exactly, but it can also be a kind of add-on, in that when the beauty of soloing is really it's like a balloon. It can expand to fit the student's ability, so that someone who only knows 3 notes, they can still jam along with the blues, and they can still play a rhythm. Someone that knows the scale and the fingerboard, they can expand on that. But everybody still has a chance to play something within the ensemble. And I also think it's being in the rhythm section, hold it all together. That's, people don't see that as, it's not as flashy, so it tends to get devalued. But actually having someone who doesn't know very much, but can really play their chords in time, hold everything together, that makes a massive difference as well. So it's about trying to get people to see the different value of the different bits of the ensemble, really.
Right. So before we ask if there are any questions, and feel free to put anything in there. I see Tiki Dave has joined us, famous one-note solos, pulling muscles from a shell, squeeze, rocking in the free world by Neil Young. There's also, isn't there a C jam or something, like a jam on the note C?
There's Tomorrow Never Knows, where that was the Beatles had written all these different songs, and then John Lennon said, "I'm going to write a song that just has one note in the backing."
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, since I'm in front of a clavinova, whether we could do some jamming. So I could use this as a backing track, and then I'll stop, and then somebody else can jam to those 4 chords, and the rest of us are muted, and just do it for a while until you're ready to stop. Does anybody want to participate in this? I'm just gonna.
What would be okay with the time lag?
Well, the thing is, if everybody's muted, right, then you hear whatever you hear, right? You just play along to it. As long as only one person is unmuted at that time. But before I go into that, I don't have any more questions, really, because this is a topic I really want to know how to teach my students. I haven't taught improvisation yet. Maybe what we could do is I'll put it out on the floor, just show everybody. If you all, anybody raise your hand if you have taught improvisation, and any additional things you want to say, just raise your hand. See, Shukong, you've unmuted. You've taught improvisation.
So I'm actually only learning a bit of improvisation myself, and one day I'd love to teach my group. But one thing I had heard with, and it seemed like really good advice, and you might find it useful too, is when you're playing, I was told a long time ago, don't judge what you're doing as good or bad. Because if you tell yourself, oh, that's bad, you'll hold back and you won't be as free with what you're trying to do. And if you think it's really good, well, it's no longer really improvisation anymore. You're just going to try to repeat that nice thing, which is, in sometimes it's nice to discover a cool riff that is your signature sound, for example. But it also becomes more of a composition and not so much a free improvisation in the pure sense. So whether we call it evaluate or judge, I think I think it's useful to not judge whether it's good or not at the moment, right? And just because that's what will hopefully let people free to do what they want. I hope that's true.
I remember once I did a gig and I did a solo, and I actually got a round of applause from the audience. And I was thinking to myself, if you'd heard what I imagined in my head I was going to play, that would have been worth applauding. I'm not sure why you're applauding what actually came out. So, like you're saying, we probably are our worst critics. But certainly with these like exercises, I know what you're saying about taking risks all the time. I think that's how you develop. My intention with these is just to give people a foothold, really, and say this is how you could start doing it to get going. But eventually, definitely experiment and try different stuff. Learn different, it's like learn unusual scales and listen listen to lots of different music as well.
Yeah, this is great. So different kinds. So far, you've talked about 12-bar blues and also the pop common chord progression, the four-chord progression. So if we go to another genre of music, for example, Hawaiian music, how do you solo over that? I'm going to ask Mark to share his experience of learning how to solo. Mark,
I have to relearn how to unmute. I haven't been on Zoom in 6 weeks. So I go to Kanakapilas where people take pa'anis, and which is Hawaiian for play. And what I've learned is that what I'm trying to do, my beginning point, is trying to just imitate the melody. Because I feel like improvisation is to some extent a riff on the melody. And if you can speak the melody, then you can speak the riff on the melody. So what I've learned, and this goes back to your point about how easy it is for you to improvise on a keyboard, when you hit a key, what noise is going to get made. I don't know when I pluck a particular note that I'm fretting, what noise is going to be made. So my goal has been to teach myself that, to play this note. This is this is the noise that gets made when I'm playing an F note. If I want to make that noise, I have to do this. And so really it's a matter of just teaching my head, my ear, and my head and my finger to say, this is the noise I'm hearing in my head. What do I have to do on the fretboard and on the strings to make that noise? And so that's really just about practice, the way that you learned how different keys on a keyboard make a different noise. So that's the first point I wanted to make. And the second point I wanted to make is that for me, it makes sense to sometimes in a kanakapila, I'll play along softly instead of playing the chords. I'll try to play the melody as people are singing it. And that gives me an opportunity to practice the melody against people who are actually, singing the melody. It's really just, for me, it has just come down to learning what notes appear where on the fretboard. And I'm getting better at that, actually, which is why I brought it up at all. I can now listen to a melody and sort of replicate it on an ukulele. And that's something I couldn't do 6 months ago.
So Mark, sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
Just a technique or an exercise I was taught by one of my teachers is when you do a scale, after you've played the first note, sing the next note before you play it, and then do that up and down the scale. And that's one. There's loads and loads of things, but that's one exercise that I'll develop that a bit, really. And there's the other thing I said as well about singing along with the chord progression. You find something you singing that you like, see if you can then find the notes. And it's I read an article about I don't have it. The facilities some musicians have. Just look at a score for orchestra and just hear it. And the great piece of advice in this article was this is a facility that not every musician has, but every step in that direction will have its own rewards. And I think that's true with these kind of ear training exercises as well.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Lindsay. Just before we move on to the next one, thanks, Mark. So it sounds like being able to hear it, yeah, it is very important in improvisation. I just want to say sometimes because I'm such a sight reader, when I'm improvising, I don't even hear what's supposed to come. My fingers, because I've done so many scales, it's the physical motion. I'll do this, and it all kind of figures out. I'm not hearing it. Does that?
Can you relate a sound to a finger movement?
No, not necessarily.
Right.
Yeah. Let's just move on. Yeah, feel free to put in chat any websites or anything you find helpful to learn how to improvise or how to teach improvisation. Thanks again, Mark. I'm gonna now go to Tiki Dave. Tiki Dave.
Hey, how's everybody today? Good. Coming through loud and clear, okay? All right. Great points. Everybody's making great points. Good advice. One of the things that when I started playing, I started as a guitar player, like many of us, I guess, did. And when I started to learn how to play, to improvise, my teacher, he said, take the music, find a piece of music, and don't even touch the instrument first. Sing, because everybody can sing. And sing what your ear hears. You know, and you don't have to be complicated about it. You know, long tones, what have you, chord tones and such. Just sing what you think fits. And record yourself doing it. And then if you find something you like, go to the instrument, see if you can find those notes, and then put that into your little bank. Because I think what we have is, as musicians, we all have we have a bank that we've stored up things in our head that we know what works over certain things. We hear certain chord progressions, we hear certain songs, we know what works. And that's just from years and years of doing things. You can be scalar about it and talk about scales and what you can play over and such. But if you can't sing it, it's pointless, I think anyways. Chick Corea said, never play anything that you can't sing, and slow down. You know, he didn't say slow down, but I've had teachers tell me all the time, slow down. Because what happens is we all have these stock licks that we know when we play. And I think it gets ahead of us. And before we know it, we're just flying around without giving any thought to forming a melody. And I think, you know, improvisationally, that's what it comes down to, is playing a melody that is pleasing to you or the listener. So to teach it, I would say you start without even having an instrument in your hand. You know, if you have a student, you know, just give them a song, the progression that you listed, give them a simple blues progression, give them a simple 1-6-4-5, what have you, 2-5-1s, things like that, and just have them loop it, have them sing over it, so they can start hearing, you know, in their ears what sounds right. And the physical part can be taught. I mean, that's, you know, that's just nuts and bolts. But I think that's an important thing, is to be able to sing what you're playing. You know, that's just my experience with it. And, you know, and different, again, we talk about scalar things. There are lots of different scales you can use. But if I was going to teach someone, and I have, and shown people, if I was going to show them one scale, I would teach them a pentatonic scale. I mean, that's bread and butter for all of us. And it fits a lot of what we're doing, unless you're trying to play over giant steps. You know, that's the scale I think everybody should use. And then you go from there. And you talked about motifs and things like that. It's important. I mean, if I'm teaching someone how to improvise or to build a solo or to play over it, I would tell them to go listen to, there's one particular song called Blue Sky by a group called the Allman Brothers Band. And there's about a 4.5-minute solo in there by one of my favorite guitar players named Dickie Betts. And if you listen to it, what he's doing, he's just building piece after piece after piece after piece. He's repeating some things. He's evolving it as he goes along. And don't be afraid to repeat, but just add on to it, which is something I heard as well. So, to listen to how others do it as well. Listen to yourself, record yourself. If you're talking to a student, record yourself singing over the changes, try to duplicate it, find it on your instrument, and then start listening to other people and hear what they're doing as far as that goes. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I think the recording yourself is, I tell my students to do this all the time. And certainly I remember there's a situation where I used to play my scales really unevenly, and my teacher used to continually pick me up on it. And I said, "What is that about?" And so one day I just sat down and recorded myself. Oh yeah, that's. I tell my students, that's really good advice. But yeah, it's about the sound before the cymbals, the sound before anything else really.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Thanks, Tiki Dave. What about the role of being able to vocally harmonize? I find that, having sung in choir, and it really helps me when I'm, think about theme and variations, right? You have a piece, so you play it as written, right? But then when you repeat again, you want to do something different. And one of the ways to vary that is just to play another voice rather than the melody. Would you say harmonic training in that sense would help to, because some people, they could hear, another part or sing another part?
Yeah, funny enough, I've just become quite interested in the jazz guitarist Freddie Green, and a lot of his big band parts, they're not the whole chord. He just chooses sometimes just one note, and that's really useful to know about as well. What note to fit in with it. Definitely. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Steve. Anybody else want to say anything? A question or how you could use this in improvising or teaching improvisation? No one. How about, should we just introduce ourselves and talk about how we could use it in our own teaching practice? Tiki Dave, why don't we start with you since you're unmuted? You lead groups and you also give ukulele workshops on cruises to Hawaii. And how would this be useful for you?
For the groups that I teach,
Yeah,
to be 100% honest, it wouldn't, because the people who I'm teaching, there is little room for improvisation. They're just getting the basics down. So it really wouldn't work or be something that I present. But okay, let's take a little differently. If we're talking about soloing in general, improvisation, you can talk rhythmic improvisation. So yes, you could, even beginners, you can teach them a little bit about varying it up, what sounds right to you, what feels right. But for my classes that I teach for the most part on the ship and the things that I lead, there really is not much room for that.
I'm just thinking, yeah, that, players of all levels, they can join different groups, right? And those players that know how to improvise, they can play the same 3-chord song, but they could improvise on it and have so much fun, right? So therefore, the beginner groups no longer become exclusive to beginners only. Somebody's partner may be there and say, gosh, this is boring, but you know what? I'll join you because I know how to solo on top of it. I know how to improvise. I could have fun.
Well, I find that, and I stress that as well, as, when I'm teaching on the ship and what have you, or leading sessions, is that if you know how to do something, go right ahead. But and I'm going to say this, that can lead to, and again, this has very little to do with what we're talking about, but that can lead to, especially if you're dealing with beginners, you have people in the room who are flying around, who are improvising and who are playing and such. It can lead to some intimidation, which makes for a not very productive class environment sometimes for beginners. But that's another session, another topic.
I hope that would do the opposite. It would inspire them,
Well,
to feel like, hey, that's where I'm going to get to one day.
It can, but the thing with beginners is, and I'm sure everybody who's taught here knows, with beginners, they're so focused and so concentrated on just getting to the next chord change. It's very intimidating to them. And yes, sometimes it's something that they say, oh, that's neat, I want to learn how to do that. But most of the time for beginners, it's something that is intimidating.
Right. So in my group classes, because often I get different levels, I give people the option, this is what the level is at. But if you want to do this, kind of like in a fitness class, some of you might have problems with your knee, so this is what you do. Some of you, are hyper, so you could do the third level, So I'm just wondering if anybody has that. Does anybody else teach groups where you have to cater to different levels, just in case, and giving them different options? Mark, yeah, you lead groups. That's right.
Yeah, as everybody knows by now, I don't teach per se, but I do lead an ukulele group that has people of different age levels in it. And Dave, I'm sure you have the same experience with your groups. There are some people who come to my groups and say this is boring. I know that I've had people drop out of my Zoom group because they're like, we try to share the leading of songs, and if a lot of the songs are led by people who are more rudimentary in their playing, then that is boring to the people who aren't. Although on Zoom you're muted, so you can play at home and do what you want. The last time we met in person, there were some beginners in my group, and the advice I gave to them was, and this has nothing to do with improvisation, but it might someday. The advice I gave to them is look for a chord wait for us to get to that chord, and then play it when we get there. And that not only helps them feel like they're participating, it teaches them how to follow a song sheet, because they have to know where they are at any given time, even if they're not playing every single chord. And that makes them feel participatory. It doesn't offend the more advanced players. There are strategies for bringing people of different levels together, I think.
I think it's good to acknowledge that there are different levels, just so people don't feel left out. So that's good. But in Zoom, it's quite different because you can only hear one person.
Well, one of the things that happens in both my Zoom and other groups is that there are some people who want to take solos. Like if you're leading a song, you might want to play a solo, and people have varying degrees of skill at that. So, there's one person, and this is probably common among people who are playing solos for the first time, they lose the tempo. They're so busy focusing on what the next note's going to be. I have to play the right notes. I have to make sure I'm following the melody, that they lose the tempo, which is frustrating for people at home who are trying to strum along. And it's probably worse in person than it is on Zoom, because you just, if somebody's screwing with the tempo, you can just put down your ukulele and wait for them to stop. But in my group, both in Zoom and in person, I don't teach, but I look for teachable moments. And that's one of them, which is that, when you solo, you need to be mindful of the tempo. And if you're soloing and you can hear other people, which doesn't happen on Zoom, then the rhythm, as Dave was saying earlier, gives you an opportunity to know where you are, where you should be in your solo, whether you're there or not.
I think that's a really good point, because when you're in a group and you're soloing, it's like everybody else becomes your backing track. But when you're in Zoom, when you're soloing, not only are you doing your solo, you're actually leading the group as well. So if you lose the tempo, everybody gets lost. So it's quite a challenge. I'm just wondering, Shukong, would you like to comment on what you just shared in chat?
Actually, I'd like to support Mark in your statement about multiple people at different levels, right? I have a group of misfit ukulele players, and they're great. You know, the ones that come back. I tell my group is called Shukulele, just as a fun thing, and somewhere on my blog, I put in 10 years ago, I put in the Shukulosophy, which is play the chords you know, skip the ones you can't do, but join us for the finale, right? Look for that last chord, get ready, and participate to the extent you can. And so thank you for taking that very similar approach, right? I mean, it's the whole point is to have people participate as much as they can to the degree they can. Actually, the thing I put in the chat, I only came across like in the past few months, and it's an interesting book, and it actually reflects what Tiki Dave was saying before about singing the tune and playing that tune, because a lot of it is actually done with vocalization of the improvisation, and there's a model by which this outfit, the Improvise for Real people, are approaching this, and it is there's a melody in your head, and you already know what that, or you might not if you're improvising, but there's something in your head, and there's the instrument. So there's a need to link what's in your head to a map of the music, of the sound. And then the idea is to take that map and link it to your instrument. So the more you can actually vocalize, the more it becomes a part of you. I've had a lot of fun with the book, and they do have a free newsletter that's very helpful, I think, in doing improvisation. And so I do want to mention, I played piano before for many years, and it turns out that there are many chord progressions that are very popular, and it turns out that, at least on the piano, what I found is as you play the chord progression, if you land on one of the notes in the chord on the beat, you can do almost anything you want in between. I think, and you're talking about, filling in time. The chord progression from the last hymn that was, or the last thing that was played, and I find myself noodling over that. But as long as you land within the chord, you're free to do anything you want. And so I've been exploring that on the keyboard myself, on the piano, but I'm trying to figure out how to bring it to the ukulele, and it's so far it's a struggle, but that's my ultimate goal, to bring it to that instrument. Yes, Dave.
If I can, you just struck on something I think that is important, is to make sure that if you're teaching people that they have the tools to be able to do it. and not giving them too much to begin with. Because there's no sure way to turn somebody off than to overload them with information. But and forgive me, I'm looking at names because I'm meeting a lot of people for the first time. Lindsay said something about that when you're improvising, you're never more than one note away from the right note. Yeah. So I think that I love that, and I've heard that before, but I love that. But it reminded me, and then what you just said about melody, is I think before you teach somebody to improvise, and before any jazz player begins to improvise on anything or any song, they have to know the melody backwards and forwards. You got to. So what this ties into is, if you're trying to teach somebody to improvise, make sure that they learn the melody of it, of whatever song it is, even if it's like a stupid little pop song. Learn the melody of it, because there's a reason that melody is there, because it fits the chord progression or whatever chords they're being played at the time. And then either with the instrument or singing along with it, sing the melody. And then, as you said, in the little breaks, try a little riff, try something, just go off a little bit, and then get back to the melody, because it can all begin with the melody, or it should all begin with the melody. And as Lindsay said, you're never more than a half step away from the right note. But then again, there is, in improvisation, I'll be honest, there is no such thing as a wrong or a right note. There really isn't. I mean, it's what you feel at the moment fits in. There can be dissonance, which is another thing, by the way, that people, when they're beginning to improvise, they never consider dissonance. And a lot of people,
is good, isn't it? Because it provides tension for the resolution. And
yeah, well, I was going to say tension and resolution. That's and again, Lindsay, I think you said, if you consider that you hit a wrong note, which that's nebulous whether you actually hit a wrong note or a right note. But if it doesn't sound right to you, I do it all the time because I play so many wrong notes. Hammer that thing for the next two bars. I meant to do that. Listen to that. Isn't that cool?
I think it was Frank Zappa that said a wrong note played timidly is a mistake, but the wrong note played with conviction and vigor, that's artistic interpretation.
What do they say? That if you're going to make a mistake, make it loud so everybody can hear you.
Absolutely.
Well, I love that. I'm always saying to my students, fake it till you make it. Don't apologize, because nobody else will know that you made a mistake, especially if you look confident. They will think, what was that? It's just my ear. It's just me. Right. So I want to also talk about the opposite of soloing, which is improvising on the harmony, like accompaniment, improvisation. One of the classes I'm giving is, I call it piano harmonization, where, for example, Can't Help Falling in Love. You could play it as if you're accompanying Elvis, or you could play it as if it's UB40 reggae style, or you could play it like a hymn, or you could play it, who else did that? I think Piano Guys did a version of it. So I think on the ukulele, definitely you could have arpeggios to make it sound like a ballad, or you could, make it block chords and strums to make it sound like a hymn. Lindsay, do you want to say something about that? Teaching improvisation on accompaniment.
I suppose, yeah, it's about introducing people to different styles, isn't it, and showing them that the 1-6-4-5 chord progression that's used in so many different songs, and that can also be an introduction to, well, you can do it like this. But OMD have done electronic one, and Oligate, that song uses the same chord progression that was being used in the 1950s. In fact, it's I think it's actually in Tchaikovsky as well. There's a piece of music from Swan Lake that uses it as well. So it's still the same chords, and it's about just showing people how you can do different things with the same chords, really. They're still with the same chords.
Yeah, that's right. So we don't have that much time left. I just wonder if Jenny, you want to say something? Welcome to our group. We've been hanging out. Why are you interested in this topic? Maybe you could tell us a little bit where you are zooming in from.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm in the UK. I teach very young kids up to sort of pensioners, but I don't teach any groups at the moment. I'm mostly teaching one-to-one. I've got some kids doing exams. I've got some dyslexic kids who find reading music extremely hard. So you know, being able to play by ear and knowing chord progressions and knowing scales and being able to play by ear is a real skill for them. I suppose it's something that I like to sort of introduce in little baby steps right from the beginning, you know, kind of getting them to use their ears. Can you hear what I'm playing? Can you play it back? Can you play something different back? You know, maybe just playing with one bar rhythms or stuff, but I think it's all kind of the first building blocks of being able to do that, of being able to improvise. So
Welcome. So
thank you.
chicken or the egg? Is it ear training first before improvisation, or improvisation helps you with ear training?
I don't know, chicken and the egg, like you say.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's breaking the fear for a lot of people as well. If you use the word improvisation, they kind of bulk, but if you don't even necessarily need to describe it in those terms. It's just like, here are the notes of the scale, now do something with those notes, or you know, let's play some rhythms with the pentatonic scale. It's what Lindsay was saying about, you know, your favorite pudding.
Yeah.
Let's just start playing with these things that we've learned, and where does it go?
So can we try this? I mean, I can't wait to try it. Since we all have our ukuleles, Lindsay, can we do the C, A minor, F, and G or G7 chord, those 4 chords? And
Yes.
yeah. So maybe you could lead us. We're all muted, and then after you're done, you could say and then I will unmute myself and I do it.
Okay. Well, should I just play an accompaniment with the solo over? Would that be the most straightforward way?
You could do the backing track, or you could do whatever you want, and then, you know, we'll just follow you. Yeah.
I'll do a backing. People can sort of go along with it. Here we go.
And,
then. So,
and wait, and after me, who wants to go after me? Or actually say, who wants to go before me? Tiki Dave? Okay, all right. And then after Tiki Dave, who wants to go after him? We'll see if we have enough time.
We have
Mark,
to go?
No. Okay. If you don't want to go, you don't have to. Jenny, do you want to go?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. Just
I might.
take your time and we'll do it. So I'll mute myself and then go ahead, Lindsay.
together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, it's just that again. I suppose I can't hear you, so I don't know. Okay.
So are we supposed to be playing over when Lindsay was playing?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought there was a track coming up somewhere.
So should I go around? I go around, and then if people solo over the chord progression twice and just go on to whoever's next. Will that work?
Yeah, when you're done, just call out, say I'm done, neck over to you, and then I'll
Okay, right.
connect. And when I'm
So
done, I'll
just
say over to you, Tiki Dave. Yeah.
okay. And do you want to start then? Here we go. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Who's next? Jenny?
Okay. I think I know what it is. I'm on the piano, so I could do both accompaniment. I could
All
strum
right.
with my left hand and I could solo on my right. I
Right.
just realized on the ukulele we can't do that.
Yeah.
Can I have a go at this? I'm just going to mute everyone. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Tiki Day.
Okay. So you want me to play over the progression? You want me to accompany the progression? What would you like me to do?
You could, yeah, you don't have a backing track. You could do whatever you want just with those 4 chords, so we'll follow you.
So somebody playing over it? I'll just keep going. Somebody wants to play over it.
Can I share something that we could improvise too? Because I just remembered I did exactly these 4 chords with a gentleman at the Ala Moana Mall. Kind of, yeah. So here it is. Let me just share that. exactly those chords. Just gonna share that. So I'm gonna stop share. But that was a lot of fun because it was just those four exact chords.
Who was the player in?
That's Keola Kaio, and I never met him until we met face to face when I went to his store. He's a ukulele instructor and also a surf instructor. Yeah, and
Surprising.
it it was great fun because we waited till there was nobody in the store. Yeah. Uh, and then we started to jam so we could record. And then people started flooding in and they were walking very slowly because they wanted to listen to us and they didn't want to leave. So that was fun. All right. Well, we've got 5 more minutes. I want to thank Lindsay for preparing and giving us a fantastic talk about improvisation, teaching improvisation, and all those. I think it's the first time since we've had this topic. And thank you all for joining us. And Tiki Dave, thank you for showing up and sharing all your wisdom and experience as well. And Jenny, welcome to the group. And everybody else that was here earlier but had to leave. And I want to give a plug to Mark, who is going to be spotlighting our next meetup, which is, I'm not quite sure, I didn't hear from you whether you could make it on the second or the third Saturday in May. Which one?
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't realize I had a choice. I just assumed it was going to be the third Saturday.
Third Saturday. Good, because
Yeah,
the second Sunday is Mother's Day, isn't it? So
yeah.
third Saturday. And can you
What
tell
day
us
would
a little
that
bit
be?
about, pardon?
What day would the third Saturday be?
Let me take a look. But yeah, I don't have it right. I think 6 plus 7, 13 plus 7. That would be 20th of May, I believe.
Oh,
Yeah. Are you able to make it? Is everyone able to
yeah,
make that?
that's
Yeah. So, Mark, would you tell us a bit about what you're going to do? Um,
Yes, I occasionally teach Hawaiian Strum workshops, and I am going to not give you the whole workshop, which takes an hour, but do the behind the scenes tour of the workshop, tell you why I do what I do, and show you some of the things, but not all of the things that I would do, because you guys don't have to learn this as much as you want to probably look at the teaching aspect of it. I'm assuming that that's what you want. So I actually I taught this most recently at Smoldering Uke at the beginning of March, and every time I teach it, I learn something new about how to teach it. So I'm happy to share all that with you next time.
So I took a peek at what you're going to be doing, and I think that's fascinating. All the different kinds of Hawaiian strums or strum patterns. Are those standard? Do everybody who's grown up with the ukulele in Hawaii
Yeah, they're
know
not all the standard ones, but they're basic.
basic
Um,
ones? Okay.
yeah, you will hear them if you listen to Hawaiian music enough. The other thing I learned is that, well, my basic premise is that the ukulele functions as a rhythm instrument in traditional Hawaiian music. And I think the application of this more broadly than Hawaiian music is that when people are singing in groups, like they go to San Francisco Ukulele Rebellion, they're generally using the ukulele as a rhythm instrument. And they're always saying, well, what strum should I use? And they always end up doing down, down, up, down, which is not an appropriate strum for almost all the pop songs I can think of. It's great for reggae, it's great for some Hawaiian music, but it's not great for All My Lovin', for example. And people do that because they don't appreciate the relationship between playing an ukulele and establishing the rhythm of the song. And so one of the things I try to teach people is how to figure out what strum to use, not by technique or by anything, but just by hearing it and how would they tap their foot. And if you tap your foot a certain way to the song, that's the rhythm for you of that song. That's how you should play it. So I think that I accomplish that when I teach this workshop.
I think it's a very important topic because, one of the most asked questions is, what strum should I use? And the second one is, oh, please don't tell me it's the calypso strum. I'm so tired of it and I want to wean myself out of it, please. You know. So
I always say, what's the drum beat you hear in your head when you hear this song? That should be your strum.
yeah, that's good. Great. So we look forward to that. Thank you, Mark. So
Thank
this
you
is going
for
to be,
giving me the opportunity.
yeah, so this is the third Saturday in May and the same time as always, which is what, uh, 5 o'clock here on the East Coast,
2
10
p.m.
o'clock,
here in San
2
Francisco.
p.m. San Francisco. Okay. And
Some ungodly hour in the UK, right?
10 o'clock, yeah.
not as bad as Singapore or Kuala Lumpur. It's just exactly 12 hours away, so it's 5 in the morning, and over there, and then 7 in the morning, Sydney. So, but thank you for staying up late, Jenny, and also Lindsay and Colin, who had to leave earlier, and Tiki Dave. You're in Vegas now, right? So it's not an
Yes, ma'am.
ungodly hour, right? You're
It is not. No, it's quite a nice hour, actually.
okay. Well, please join us. And Mark, thank you so much. Well, if we don't have any burning questions or comments, I'm going to stop the recording. And I'm going to also thank everybody who's been watching us in Zoom. Please join us. It's every month. And we're open for topics for upcoming months in June, July, and the other months. And then come August, we would have done this for 3 years.